Okay, we're live. We should just be starting. We should just be starting. Are we all good? Are we all good? Should we just start? Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. While we are just waiting for everyone to join, can we maybe just get a sense of where everyone is joining us from today? So maybe just put on the chat, where you're joining us, from which part of the world. And within the next few seconds, we will get started. London. Los Angeles. I'll share mine too. Prague, Germany, Barcelona. Oh, that is awesome. Hey, very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, while everyone is sharing where they're joining us from, let's get started. Denver, Nigeria. Amazing. I'm really excited about this event that we are bringing today with PM Dojo and Adrian. I'm Bosky and I'm the founder of PM Dojo. Today's topic is about transitioning into product roles, but specifically trying to transition and succeed as a product lead in the space of Web3. So let's deep dive. We have lots of stuff to cover. And so before we get started, there's just some housekeeping things for all of us. Participate. This is your chance to interact with everyone. And, if you want to take a shot of something that you like, feel free to take that screenshot, share it on socials, and make sure that you can tag PM Dojo. We are on all social media channels, and you can see some of them, especially LinkedIn and Instagram. You do see some of the hashtags that you can use there, but definitely tag us. We'll further use to amplify your posts. Introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, like you're doing, and engage with the conversation, and maybe you're going to make some connections along the way as well. So with that, let's kick off today's event. So essentially, I would love to share a little bit about what PM Dojo is, the community, and what we do for all of you who might not be familiar. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes there. And then, of course, we are going to be talking with our special guest, Adrian. She's amazing, and I cannot wait for all of you to hear from her. And of course, we want to leave some good chunk at the end of today's event for Q&A. So from a timing perspective, we want to spend roughly about 20 minutes or so in a live chat with Adrian, where she's going to be presenting and talking about Web3 and product. And then we're going to spend the last about 15 or so odd minutes in question and answers. And we're going to be taking in all of those questions out there. So keep them on the chat. You can definitely share your questions on the chat as they come up. And then, my wonderful team here, Bernice, she's going to be moderating the chat as well. In case you have any questions, feel free to just simply ask. Don't leave that till the very end. So PM Dojo, very briefly, we started PM Dojo as a global learning community in 2019. And it's been just amazing in the last, I would say, about 2.5 years, how much we've grown. So, the way I like to see it is that we have people in our community from all different parts of the world, and we're growing every day. And essentially, PM Dojo is a diverse and a learning community for people who are either interested to get into a product role, or for folks who are in a product role and they're looking to advance in a product role. And when I say product, I'm talking about product management, product research, as well as product design. And the mission behind PM Dojo as a community was really to do our bit in trying to make the tech industry more equitable and inclusive, diverse, and accessible for all. These are not just buzzwords and heavy words, but this is something that I, as a founder, take very, very seriously in everything that we do. both from trying to make the community as inclusive as possible, from mentors who can be extremely well role models, and really trying to design our programs and community events in a way that we actually create a really safe environment to learn and make mistakes. And how we help our community, we have lots of stuff. So of course, events like this, which is part of our free community. And you, if any one of you are following us on socials, there should be an announcement coming either today or tomorrow. So please stay tuned. We are launching our broader community platform, and essentially that's, if you subscribe and join our community, that's going to give you priority access to some of these community events that we hold, which are completely free. It'll also give you priority access to some of the jobs and some of the top AMAs that we're going to be hosting monthly with leaders from across the world and across some of the big tech companies. So if you do want to be part of the free community, definitely make sure that you subscribe on our website so that you get to know. So watch out for that announcement coming in the next day or two. And of course, on the other side, which is something that's been really intentionally designed at PM Dojo, and that's our unique product accelerator program. I'm not going to bore you with all of those, but essentially the accelerator program is a 10-week, very, very immersive program where you get to collaboratively work with designers, researchers, software developers, product managers to launch a real product in 10 weeks with mentorship. Adrian is also one of our alumni from PM Dojo. And with our industry track, you also get matched up with a real company to help them solve a problem and launch their products. So it's really cool, especially if you're trying to transition and you find yourself in that chicken and egg problem where you don't have experience. It really, really helps. And we've had some amazing results over the last 2 years. More than 92% of our fellows have made successful transitions. They have quadrupled their salary. Many of them are receiving promotions. And so it's been just amazing to see the growth there. So with that, enough of me talking. I really want to welcome Adrian. She was an alumni in the last cohort in PM Dojo's accelerator program. She's part of the industry track. And just over the last several months, I've got to know her. And she's amazing. And when we wanted to talk about this topic, I don't think we could have thought of anyone better. So with that, Adrian, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and the stage is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Bosky. I'm so great to be here. Really love PM Dojo and everything that you have done for kind of the product community, especially with inclusivity and accessibility. So just to give you a little bit about my background, I have a unique role in that if those of you are familiar with Web3, you will understand that what my role is DAO lead. DAO is an acronym for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And this role is a unique role in that it is a leadership role that revolves around community and product and kind of organizational infrastructure. So it's not technically a product role, but it's a role that I've approached from a product mindset. So I come into this role with kind of a 20-year history from print and visual design, ad agency work. I have done front-end web and app development. I've also been an entrepreneur. I've consulted startups and founders, both in their product-led strategies and in their design and brand vision. I've worked with national and international brands, both as a designer, creative director, and product marketing manager across multiple industries. As a founder and entrepreneur, I also did physical products and manufacturing. So I'm familiar with the transition that it takes to go from a more traditional product manufacturing role into a more technical product-led role, and really have sort of compiled the last 20 years into the role that I'm in right now. During the pandemic, I really wanted to kind of find a way to bring all of my skill sets together, and wanted to expand into more of a technical product management role. Initially, I was looking at AI, different technology stacks like machine learning, what sort of product roles existed out there. I was considering MBA school, but as a single parent, that was going to be a very expensive investment, and I was not sure if that was the direction I wanted to go in. I also started to really think about blockchain and Web3, and sort of those technologies that are kind of on the cusp of being in a product role in a new technology sector. So with that, I really had to start like thinking about what my priorities were. And as a individual that has kind of done product through design thinking, design and development throughout my whole career, it really was important for me to determine what the next phase of career growth looked like, and how that would expand not only my skills and that work-life balance, but also in finding that perfect fit for me. Having taken a lot of different roles over the years and evolved my skill sets, I really came to this place of approaching my next role as an environmental fit, where I could excel in my strengths and the things that I do well. And it became this place where I was looking at what are my transferable skills into product, into a more technical product role. What sort of tech stack or technology sector did I want to land in, which is why I did a little bit of that discovery. And then also, what sort of education did I need to get there? And then lastly, that big piece that comes together as to what is a good personal fit for me, what am I passionate about, and what are my goals? Everyone has different reasons as to why they want to come into product. And I think for you, approaching that from that mindset is really important. Which brings me to the idea that, like, as I researched and looked at what my next steps were, I prepared for MBA applications. I was studying for the GMAT required to get into MBA school here in the US. And I discovered PM Dojo and met with Bosky. I was looking at a lot of different product school opportunities, whether there were certifications, but really loved the idea that I could get real world experience as I worked on expanding my skill sets into a more technical product management role, which is what led me to do the industry track cohort. And during that time, I also kicked off a deep dive into blockchain and Web3 concurrently to kind of learn more about that technology space. From there, I really discovered quickly that this space is very developer heavy, that the energy and collaboration value is high within communities, and that there is a need for many roles in Web3, but especially product-led roles. And so, which kind of brings me to being here with you today in kind of tips for transitioning into a product role in Web3. Primarily in Web3, you are dealing with a huge on-ramp of learning here. And so you have the blockchain technology, you also have users and community, and then you have this idea that everyone is learning as well as organizational structure. So we're going to dive into the first kind of core concept of Web3 in understanding the basics of the technology. So with that, we really have blockchain and Web3 technology as our core basics with that. And really, in a product role, you've got to understand whatever tech stack you jump into, you have to understand why does it matter and why are you interested in going into that role. Crypto sort of has one feature that has never really existed before, and that is trust. And when you get into the deeper levels of technology in blockchain and trust, you are really looking at if trust can be set by code and validated across a channeled chain network. It's this essential concept of peer-to-peer networking. So think of like GoFundMe, things that you do person to person that don't have to rely on a middleman to really have that happen. With that, when you're reducing the middleman in blockchain technology, then you can kind of finally own the upside of your work. Web3 is this concept of having a read, write, own. So Web 1 is the early internet days where you were primarily reading on listservs or servers. You were able to collect information that people were putting up on the internet, but it was very basic. Web 2 became read and write. And with that, with Web 2, that is kind of the internet as we know it today. That is the ability to kind of share content, to write, to push content out there. That is the onset of social media. It's the sharing of software as a service. And Web 3 brings in this additional component of ownership. And when things are shared on a blockchain or a blockchain network, individuals are working to record those, what they would call transactions that are shared on that network and expanded into true ownership, whether it's those completing the work, whether it's through ownership of a product, ownership of content. And so that's one of the really big use cases of Web3 that's really relevant for product. You don't have to rely on trust, and you don't have to rely on middlemen to complete the technology or be the go-between. So in Web 2, we have lawyers that connect for helping us navigate the court system. Whereas in Web 3, you have these smart contracts that basically execute by code how things happen. And that's where product management within Web 3 becomes very relevant. Also in Web3 is expanding your understanding of users and community into ecosystem. So in Web2 and product, you're primarily solving problems for individual users. In Web3, you are thinking beyond individual users and solving for a community and ecosystem. So there's a lot of crossover in product-led organizations in Web3 where they're building products that exist on the blockchain. And yet there's actually huge communities that back these products. So in Web2, traditionally you build your proof of concept or your MVP, you launch that, you work on adoption and loyalty to a small group of users, and then you expand and scale your growth accordingly. In Web3, often there are these huge communities of developers that are very passionate about what they're doing and about blockchain technology. And so there may be products that exist with a community. So for example, at the organization I'm working at Biconomy, we have a Discord server of about 36,000 community members that are building on top of our products. So you're not just leading from a product-led mindset on how do we solve problems for the users, you are also trying to understand how do we leverage our community to help solve those problems? How do we help solve problems for a community that creates a better user experience in Web3? So you have to be willing to participate and be in a collaborative mindset to join into the community aspect of this. When we think about users and community, we are really in the space of development with finding product market fit. However, when we transition into users and community, we go into the primary focus of not just being on the individual user problems, but on the products that are being built that solve that for the user, and then also how that then transitions into blockchain technology in Web3, which these products are then developed in relation to community and ecosystem experiences in addition to the users. So it's not that we are forgetting about the individual user experience. We're building on top of that with community and ecosystem experience. Which then brings us to this last component of solving the problem for the space isn't just about users anymore. It's about community and accessibility. In blockchain, it creates this ability for anyone to join in and partake in the technology, especially right now where it's very unregulated, which also creates opportunity for global individuals to participate in product-led organizations in a meaningful and value-driven way. Which brings me to kind of these product-led roles in that they revolve heavily around that community and ecosystem. So it really pays to think big and also understand how these instant communities that are thousands upon thousands of individuals, they can evolve niche products if they're really leveraged well. So as a product manager, you come in and from a Web2 mindset, you are managing cross-functional teams. You're managing, user experience teams, user research teams, your dev teams, the engineers associated with that. You're also cross-collaborating with marketing and sales, with the go-to-market strategy. In Web3, you have this additional component of really digging in and understanding how communities actually can support the product growth. It changes the evolution of the roadmap. It changes how your sprint cycles and your agility works within an organization. And so really understanding how you can leverage communities is a key skill to jumping into blockchain, essentially. Which brings us to kind of this ideology that in Web2, we really look at users. And then when you stack on a community of users that are building together in tandem, that really supports your role in a product sense. And then that also expands because then as we're building in this new technology sector, we're also connecting and cross-collaborating with other communities, which then expands the ecosystem and kind of that mass adoption of what Web3 and blockchain technology has the potential to do with regards to growing the internet as we know it now, which also leads us to product-led roles in Web3. The next piece is really that while you're in Web3, a lot of people are, there's so much jargon in the space. And so what I would encourage or remind you to understand is that everyone is learning in this space. I have only been in Web3 since probably December of 21. So in a career standpoint, that is a microscopic amount of my career. However, the running joke in Web3 is that, a month in Web3 time feels like a year in normal time. You are learning and absorbing information so fast that it's a really great space to dive into and feel like you can be a part of something bigger and that you can also contribute and collaborate. Some big things that I love about this space is that there's really no single source of truth. There's no right or wrong way to do things. So even coming in with a lot of product knowledge, jumping into Web3, you have to really kind of unpack and think about how you approach product in Web3. It's a new industry, which means there are new opportunities. My role is kind of an undefined role. As DAO lead, I obviously approach it from a product-led mindset. An engineer or a dev may approach that role from a very different mindset. But for me, being able to bring product sense into the role that I'm in was really important with that fit. Opportunity is really everywhere in Web3. Everyone is sharing and mentoring in the space. It's really a great time to learn. And so you don't have to know a lot of technical jargon. You have to be able to understand that you are willing and able to learn more than you fear the rejection or the imposter syndrome that might creep up that keeps you from joining the space. Another thing that is really important is recognizing that transferable skills can help bridge the gap into product roles into Web3. So I came from a very design heavy background, user experience and front end development background, but not as much technical product development. So I came into the space offering a lot of transferable skills like product marketing, growth strategy, creating OODA loops, while I was transitioning into understanding what more technical product roles look like. And then the other thing is with everybody learning, like I highly recommend you join product projects and or find organizations with products that you're passionate about. That's where the community piece really comes in, where you can really create your own internship or apprenticeship. One of the hardest things about getting into any sort of product role that everyone will tell you and that you'll hear on every type of webinar is the fact that real world experience is crucial to landing that job, landing that interview. And so what's really cool is you can dive into a community in Web3 and you can actually test the water. You can start to take your skill sets as you're transitioning into product in Web3, whether you're transitioning from another career path into product or you're just transitioning from Web2 product management into Web3. You can actually get that real world experience by just diving in and contributing. It does require a certain sense of autonomy and self-motivation. No one's going to tell you what to do. You sort of just have to jump in and do it. But it's great because I spent 3 or 4 months in the space just really working hard on projects while I was in my PM Dojo internship apprenticeship on the side with that accelerator program. And I came out with a great portfolio kind of ready to step into my next role into the space. Which brings me to the last kind of tip that I would say in entering this space, which is understanding the organizational structure of Web3. So there are quote unquote Web2 type companies in Web3. One of those, an example of that is like Coinbase, Amazon, Meta. They're Web2 organizations. They're software organizations that are bringing in Web3 technology. But true Web3 organizations are actually organizations that exist on blockchain. And so those organizations are called decentralized. And so when you understand organizational structure, you can understand what type of organization you are looking to target as you transition into Web3 and product. Traditional organizations are run from a top-down approach. The stakeholders have the most weight on the decisions as the products. That's your CEO, your VPs, any sort of higher level, senior level management. And then there is also the alignment that is not often communicated to the bottom ranks of the company. With that, we get into the side of Web3 and decentralization. With Web3, decentralized organizations, they are run with a community-first approach. So you are going from the outside working in, and you are in collaboration at the heart of that organization. So there are also hybrid organizations in Web3 that they started as a Web2 organization. They are working on products that are what we call dApps, which are decentralized apps, but they are also working towards decentralization, which brings us to understanding just a little bit more about what that hierarchical difference looks like, in that realistically, from a centralized organization, that is the traditional hierarchical structure that people globally are used to. They're used to having one person or a handful of people at the top. They are making a lot of those decisions. There might be a board of directors. There may be stockholders, but that transitions as those decisions are made from a small number of people down, and the entry-level employees are completing the work, which takes us to the opposite, which is the centralized organization on in Web3 orgs or in blockchain organizations where you have a community that is supporting a product. And with that, if you are decentralized, your organization likely has some sort of governance model. So instead of your CEO being the main governing force of the organization, your governance model is based off of who is contributing and how they're contributing to that project. So you will have often communities that have governance, and it's kind of I like to think of it as a targeted approach where the community is on the outer layer and they are really supporting the internal core team with the building of the products. But a lot of decentralized orgs have open source development tools or open source code that then the community can build on top of, which also helps expand that product in a much faster way than a small developer team that is working in these iterative life cycles, but then having to do user testing, user research, going through that whole process. You can almost do that live in an open source sort of way. Which brings us to really the expectation in Web3 is that when you work decentralized, you are also working to kind of unpack this idea that you answer to someone. And while we all have a responsibility in our roles, decentralization and the concept behind that is that you kind of work autonomously and you self-motivate yourself to solve problems consistently among users within the community and in expanding the ecosystem. And from there, you have this degree of unlearning that has to happen in order to manage those products in the organization that are also decentralized. You're not just trying to make stakeholders happy and while advocating for the users, you're also trying to leverage and understand your community and the community needs and how they can also support the devs and the builders on your specific product. So there's a lot of different, I would say, a lot of different hats that you wear in Web3, especially in product roles, many of which revolve around kind of steering and understanding the community as part of that product decision process and the growth with the organization. Lastly, I just want to share that product roles kind of have yet to be defined in the space. If you are someone who really enjoys working and collaborating with others, who likes the idea of cross-functional teams in a more expanded way, and in wearing a lot of hats, this space is really thriving and ready for you to bring product sense to it. There are so many developers that need support in this space and not enough product managers to go around. And a lot of the efforts in the space are very siloed. And so having more product managers come into the space, you really get to kind of author your own experience in the space. So just because my experience is one way doesn't mean that you won't have a completely different experience in the space. And I think it's really more about finding a way to leverage the skills that make you a good product manager across even traditional organizations, with being able to then transition that into community and ecosystem. And yeah, like I would love to open up the floor for questions and answers on this. I'm going to open up the comments here, but really appreciate everyone that's here today to learn about product in Web3.
Thank you, Adrian. This was really, really great. Lovely to kind of like, there's so many insights, especially I think the ecosystem thinking, even though it is there in the Web2 world, but I think the extent to which, right? Like I think there were so many nuances that you shared. So that was absolutely awesome. I'm looking at some of the questions from the chat as well here, but we do have Bernice. Bernice, if there are questions that I think we also received at the time of registration, if you want to maybe start putting them onto the chat window, or if you want to ask those questions as well, that would be lovely, and we can start taking them on. So I think there was one question about how do you should you be doing MBA and MS in computer science in order to get into a product field or Web3? I definitely have my perspective, but I would love to hear from you, and then I can talk about it as well.
So, my perspective is you've got to decide what way you learn best. That is the very first thing I'm going to say to you. I approach this, so I am neurodivergent. And the way that I learn is that if I am interested in something, I will go down that rabbit hole and really learn whatever I can about that and hyper focus on that area. And at the same time, I have had to learn how to navigate a societal structure of education systems that lead into certain roles. And I know for myself that certain things, like I don't test well. My brain just does not test well, but I can absorb information and articulate that very well. And so it's not so much a matter of, is an MBA the right program for you, or the right program to get into product management, but understanding how you learn and the best way to learn that for you. For me, I needed a more hands-on approach. I needed something that could get me in and kind of get my hands dirty. And so while I was studying for the MBA, I actually decided to opt out of the MBA and transition straight into this role. It was more about figuring out how to leverage my skills that I already had from a product-led mindset, and then also fill in the gaps to that. And as far as like the computer science component, especially when you're going into a more technical role, you've got to decide for yourself what it is that you are willing to dive in and learn. I had enough front end developing experience in the early 2000s. I was building WordPress sites. I would say I know enough code to be dangerous, but to every developer, that's kind of a nightmare. But I knew enough to be able to communicate. And that's the key thing when you go into a technical product role is, if you want to jump into Web3 in a technical product role, you just have to learn the environment or the tech stack that you're going into. Like the organization that I came into, I'm going to throw out a bunch of words here that will probably mean nothing, but like I had to learn what bridge relayers were. I had to learn about transaction hashes. Like I had to govern and determine my own learning path in Web3. The great thing is that no, like people know what they're doing, but at the same time, nobody really knows what they're doing. In that, no question is a wrong question. And so I personally do not think you need an MS in computer science. You do not need an MBA. You need the ability to direct your own learning and have autonomy and control over that. And Web3 is a great space to do that in. And there are a lot of PMs in Web3 that have MBAs that say they wish they had foregone the MBA and they wish Web3 was around 10 years ago when they were going into MBA school. So it is not a prerequisite, but I'm not bashing the MBA either. If you have that accessibility, go for it. But think about how you learn and then determine your path from that way forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. It's so important because I think we all learn differently. We also retain information differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think, there is a lot of, I think, the common talk that you're going to find everywhere. Everyone talks about MBA. There are lots of folks with MBA in product roles. There are lots of folks with computer science background in MBA. And if you think about it, just how the product management roles have evolved over the last several years, how they started in the big tech companies. The job descriptions, unfortunately, never changed over the years, and companies, they'll basically take the best practices from whatever is out there. Obviously, those big tech companies are those examples, and we're finding ourselves in at a time where you have these standard job descriptions. So something that I've learned, just also being a hiring manager myself, and running PM Dojo, is as you're thinking about how you learn, how you retain, it's also important to understand where your gaps are. And we all have gaps, right? And we're going to
Yeah.
continue to have gaps throughout a career. Even when you're a VP of product, you will still have gaps. Even when you're a VP of product, you will still perhaps want to apply for a chief product officer role, and you will still be competing against people who already have experience as a chief product officer role. I mean, that's the lifelong, right? It'll never change. And so I think it's really important to, I think, figure that piece out and then find out the shortest possible path to be filling those gaps. So I'll
Yeah,
give you
and I would say too, like that shortest possible path, think of this as like, in product, you talk about a minimum viable product. Like I use that term everywhere, like minimum viable DAO, minimum viable community, minimum viable path into product. Like what is that shortest path to execution to get you started? And I would say too, like there are no degrees in blockchain, there are no degrees in Web3. Like right now, I mean, there is only just starting to be degrees in HCI, which is human and computer interaction or user experience. And this has been an industry for 20 years. So, there won't be degrees in blockchain for another 10 to 15 to 20 years, maybe. And so I would say you don't need a degree to learn the technology stack. You just need a willingness to learn and the autonomy and the motivation to do that.
absolutely, absolutely, 100%. And then of course, check out PM Dojo, right? I mean, if you're looking for like mentorship, if you're looking for structured and hands-on learning, if you're looking to build that experience and get an experience actually working with the team to be launching a product, you're going to get all of that here, and it doesn't cost like an MBA program or an MS degree. So I think just to wrap up that one question, if you are specifically interested in targeting very technical product management roles or technical program management roles that are there in some of those companies, you may find that having some sort of a technical understanding helps. In a product role, you're not going to be coding. You're not going to be reviewing and doing code reviews of your engineering team. So you're not going to be needing that. However, if you do want to work in the tech space, I think it's important to have passion about technology. It's
Yeah.
important to understand, I think, at a very, very high level, how stuff gets built at a very high level. What are some of the environments out there that, and every company will have that different, or, your engineering team will be set up differently. And I have always gone and asked questions. Sometimes I've had to note it down in my notebook and Google it, whether it's through Wikipedia and other things. And sometimes I've had to ask questions, and yeah, it helps, and you don't have to learn everything in day one. So no, you don't need those degrees. There are lots of different paths. So hopefully we answered that question. If not, feel free to ask more questions on the chat, and we're going to cover those. There was another question, Adrian, and that was around let me gonna just pick it up. What are some of the tips for someone looking to pivot into a product management role? Boris, I've shared a blog in the chat, and that is about how do you transition. I can definitely talk from a hiring manager perspective. Adrian, you've shared your story, but if you have some more stories, would love to hear from you. Again, I think it's very important to ask yourself why. Why are you interested in a product management role? I did not realize this until I sat on the other side of the table interviewing folks. So as a hiring manager, I used to think my answers were great because I used to talk about how I want to make an impact, how I'm great in multitasking, or how I'm really so empathetic and I'm able to kind of get through that. I'm so creative. And I used to talk about all of those answers, and I thought they were bang on because everybody talked about those, right? But once I got on the other side of the table and I started interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people in product, and everybody came giving the same type of answers, I quickly realized that as a candidate, there is just no way you can stand out. So it is really important to reflect and find out your why. And it needs to be more than I'm passionate about making an impact, because you could make an impact as a customer facing role. You could make an impact as a receptionist at the company. You are going to be making an impact. And there are so many famous stories, I think, in NASA, the janitor story, right? How did he answer the question? What does he do? He didn't say, I clean the toilets or the bathrooms. He said, I help take people to space. That's what was his answer, right? So I think you can make impact in all roles. So really, I think when you start thinking about making that transition happen or pivot happen, that why is really important. And then trying to figure out how you learn, what are your gaps, if you are looking for a particular kind of support, how should you go about it? But take a look at the blog, and if that answers. And one thing that I do want to answer, that in product management, there are no industry recognized certifications. I know a lot of people will chase after certifications thinking that doing a certification in a product role is going to actually amplify their profile, and hiring managers are going to start looking at it very favorably. I'm going to put out a blog as well that was created with research from a lot of different hiring managers from big tech companies as well. And we don't even look at certifications. So again, if experience is the gap, no amount of certifications and courses is going to help you. So it's
Yeah.
really about getting that hands-on experience, and you can go and work on side projects. You can join communities and work. You can join PM Dojo, where you don't have to kind of figure all of those things out, but there are lots of different ways to do it. Adrian, anything to share there?
Yeah, I would share to like 100% Bosky on really understanding your why. There's a great YouTube that's a TEDx with Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book on it that's called Start with Why. And I think, one, look at, like, I just noticed a lot of product managers, they're keen to solving problems, which is kind of a cliche catch-all answer for interviewing, but really digging into why they want to do what they want to do, what makes you passionate, why are you passionate about it. Those are all really important pieces, and would highly recommend to listen to that talk because it gets you into that mindset of starting with why. And as you pivot into that, when you start with why, then you can start to identify those gaps from a non-emotional point of view. And that's the next thing, is that this is a really tough industry to break into. You cannot be emotional about it. You have to be strategic. And that's what makes good product managers, is your strategy behind how you differentiate yourself. And those are all different pieces of product. When you think about product, you have to have um, that differentiator. That's part of that design sense, that design thinking, or that product sense thinking. You have to understand why it's important, and you approach those roles when you're pivoting into the role from, even in an interview point, what problem do you solve for the organization that's hiring you? Like, what do you bring to the table? And how are you filling those gaps? And like Bosky said, there's no industry recognized certification. So it's actually like a blessing, in my opinion, because you get to take your strengths and then you get to fill in those gaps, and then you get to create and craft that story as to how you can kind of land that role and be successful as a product manager for that organization.
Absolutely. And I think this is needed even to sustain.
Mhm.
It's not just, I think, breaking it, because, even if you make that pivot, the path ahead is extremely, extremely hard. It's not, behind all of that glamour lies a lot of those other things. Very quickly, I know we are almost on time, but there are a couple questions, Adrian, would love to get your perspective. Um,
Yeah.
after you did your apprenticeship, how did you find a Web3 product role?
So, and this is an answer to design cringe. So when you jump into Web3, you have to kind of learn Discord, but you jump into communities, and often you can find things to build on. And so I did kind of a twofold process. I was enrolled in PM Dojo's accelerator, where I was in the industry track working on an AI um, based product. And from there, I was able to fill in the gaps in some of my knowledge as to just refining some of my skill sets there. And then I took those and I started immediately applying those to projects that I was collaborating on in Web3. So I dove in and I observed a handful of servers, kind of looked at what type of products I was interested in, started asking questions. Twitter, crypto Twitter is what everybody calls it, but Twitter is a great place to say, I want to learn more about products or projects in Web3. And then you find things. And basically, when you create your own apprenticeship or internship, is what I say, is you dive into the community and you figure out how to contribute, and you just work and you get it done, and you learn as you go. And I, like, my strategy was, I wanted to find some communities that had people already working in product, so I could just observe how they're building, and work with them. And so And then from there, there's a lot of Web3 resources. If you look on, again, crypto Twitter, if you just hashtag in Twitter DAOs or Web3 or blockchain, or Web3 jobs, there are a handful of websites. There's actually a server called Web3 PMs that you a PM to do that. You can be like transitioning into PM. So there's a Web3 PM server. And you can even Google, I think, Web3. And
Okay.
then, so yeah,
Awesome.
there's a lot of different places to find roles there.
And I think what we are going to do is, there's going to be a follow-up email that all of you will receive from us, and we will include some of the resources that you could actually look at for Web3 in general, if you want to learn, and also Web3 jobs. So there will be an email. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. And for everyone who might not have registered for the event, if you actually go and subscribe on our website to join the community, you will also receive that. So for all of you folks who are joining us live on YouTube directly as opposed to registering for the event. Awesome. Adrian, I know we just have a few more minutes. Didn't mean to cut you out. There's another question from Design Cringe, and that is, how do you get paid in DAO? Is it contribution? Is it your traditional salary structure? Like, how is it? I mean, you went through a massive exercise yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was hired by a centralized organization to help the organization move towards decentralization. So that is my primary role, like product, infrastructure, and operations. But in the DAO, like when I was collaborating in DAOs prior to coming into this role, usually DAOs determine like if they have a token, they may pay in their native token that then can be transferred into fiat, which is, whatever currency you want. Some pay in what's called stable coin, some pay in US currency. You kind of just do research. Like I did a lot of observing of different DAOs before I started contributing. I got paid in ETH and in native token, and some different DAOs that I contributed. Some of the work was volunteer, but for me, that was experience. I was getting value. But I highly recommend, if you're looking to get paid in DAOs specifically, and especially in product roles, that you find projects that have a good track record, and that you're basically, it starts usually as a contributor role, and then from there it can turn into a full-time role. One of the biggest foundations, it's called Uniswap Labs. They just did a $74 million fork to build their Uniswap foundation for their DAO. And they will be hiring like multiple roles that are full-time roles within the DAO to help with the community and their grants and funding of these projects and products. So there's a lot of different DAOs, a lot of different ways to contribute, but you've got to decide what works for you, and then you kind of find the right DAO or the community to contribute in that way. Some people want to own their work and be entrepreneurs, so you can do product consulting, and you can consult on projects. Some want to work full time and have benefits, like myself, because I have young children at home. So I went with a centralized org that is working towards decentralization.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. We'll cover a couple more questions. How is it different being a product manager versus working in a software, like as a software engineer? I can take that on. These two roles are very, very different, right? Again, different companies, the product manager and what they do is very different. But as a product manager, you're trying to figure out what are the right problems to solve. You're aligning. You're really trying to understand what the business is trying to do, where the business is moving. You have to understand the market dynamics. You have to spend a lot of the time with the users. And if you're a startup, in an early stage startup which doesn't have users, you have to go and hunt down potential prospective users and then really try to make sure that the right problems get solved, and you are responsible for the overall experience of the product. And you're going to have to work with lots of people across the company. It's a very, very collaborative role to really kind of make sure things are getting done, figure out how you're going to measure that your product is useful and it is the right product and it's successful. So there are lots of things. And again, I've not explained everything. I've just kind of given a very, very big high level spiel on it. But as a software engineer, you are going to be responsible for a lot of different things. You're going to be responsible for building it, coding it. Depending on what level you are, you might also be responsible for figuring out what might be the best technical tech stack to use, especially if you're an early stage company. If you join a pre-established, well-established company, a lot of the times the technical architecture is already predefined, unless and until you've joined a company that's going through a full-fledged re-architecture. You also have to work quite a bit with your product teams to be making sure that what's getting built actually meets the requirements of what really was the intention behind it. So at a high level, these two roles are very different. Jamie, if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Connect with me, on LinkedIn. I'm happy to kind of go deeper. And again, as a software developer, you can also join PM Dojo as a software developer and be one of those folks who work with different product managers and designers to actually launch a product. The other question that we had was, let's say you are either having an undergraduate degree in some field or a business role. How do you make a transition into the tech industry or product management? It's interesting that we have this question. So we, as a PM Dojo community, we're also working on our book that should be coming up in the next few months. It's called Unfiltered Stories of Real People in Product. And it's very, very interesting, right? And out of all the different people who've gone through PM Dojo, everyone's journey is different. And I think there is a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, like, oh, we come from a business background, oh, we come from social work background, oh, we come from nursing background, or maybe a linguistic background, that our journey or what we have to do is going to be very different. And I remember Tommy, he's a chief product officer at a tech company. He was speaking with our alumni and our fellows in one of the cohorts, and he said, everyone's path is different, and we all have our unique paths. And yes, how we actually leverage our previous experience and package it like a nice gift, and we are able to speak to it with confidence, and we actually fill in those gaps, that's going to be very different. I mean, in PM Dojo, I've seen folks who are radiologists and who do ultrasounds who've transitioned into a product role. I've hired people from social work into a product role. We had someone from a business background who transitioned into a PM role at Amazon. We've seen, like, we even have in our current cohort, it's funny you're asking, because we have someone who's an actor who is trying to make that transition into tech. So I think regardless of what your experience and background is, it comes back to, again, asking your why, trying to reflect on how you learn, what your gaps are, and trying to figure out what that minimum viable path is, right? Sometimes we may have to do things that are different than everyone else if we want to stand out. Right? So again, I think swimming against the tide, if I'm saying that idiom or that code that idiom correctly, like sometimes you do have to do things differently. And I think rather than chasing certifications or courses or just kind of like getting into that rat race is not going to cut it. It may have cut it a few years ago, but now it has become so competitive. You are going to be competing against people who already have a few years experience in that role. So it's very, very important to think about how you're going to stand out. And again, if anyone wants to chat, I'm happy to connect with on LinkedIn and answer any specific questions. But Adrian, anything you wanted to share on that? Like if people are coming from, these different non-traditional paths?
Yeah, I would just say, even though I wouldn't consider myself very tech heavy, like I came from design, but I came from a creator path initially. Like I was an art major with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, with an emphasis in graphic design. Like a lot of people, especially engineers turned product managers, will try and tell you that you are not qualified. And I think it is more about finding out how you qualify yourself. Social workers are great at understanding human behavior. Like it's really about finding that niche. And then, if you are a healthcare worker, you may be building products for healthcare that are software based technical products. You take your past experience if that's experience that you can leverage and you bring that in. Like my past experience also is being an entrepreneur. So it's great for being in Web3 because I'm working with founders and I understand their pain points, having run my own business for 8 years, and so I can pick up a lot of different tasks that are relevant to my role, but that also, they don't have to ask me to do because I see those gaps having been a founder myself. And so it's really just that you think about, if you're coming from a non-traditional, non-technical role into product, do you want to take your past experience and leverage that and find product roles with that niche, and if you don't, then it's up to you to learn the new technology stack, but it's totally a possibility. And don't be discouraged just because you don't have an engineering background.
Absolutely. And I'm going to leave all of you with this one thing. I think it is a big, I don't know how to phrase this, but there are way more different kinds of roles in a product field than just a product manager. Even if you're interested in design, there are lots of different fields within design teams than just a UX designer. And so a lot of the times it's really important to understand what are those different roles in a product team, other than being a product manager. I think a lot of people just get hung up on the title. I mean, titles are fluid, right? We didn't have product managers and product designers when I started, many years ago. And who knows, going forward in the future, even in the next few years, these titles may not remain. They might evolve into something else. Adrian's title is not product manager or anything related with product management. It's now lead. And so a lot of the times it depends on the work you're doing
Yeah.
and not so much on the title. I think there is a lot of pressure. There's all the FOMO and all these different things going on that everybody is just chasing the titles. And a lot of the time we can't see opportunities because we are kind of chasing the title. A lot of companies, even though product management has been in the field and the industry for about 12, 15 years, a lot of the companies don't understand that they need product management. And even if they do, their understanding of product management is different. And so they may be hiring for a totally different role. And if you see that there is a fit and you kind of are able to explain what your previous experiences are, and you're able to kind of even negotiate a role for you, that happens a lot. I've seen that a lot happen. You actually start interviewing and then you're like, oh, actually this is a product management role, or you know what, this is actually a product ops role. And that might be a perfect get, a way into product management if you're extremely passionate about that role. And I'm going to share some of these resources in the follow-up email that's going to come, most likely tomorrow, to everyone who's registered for the event. So I think that is really important to understand. Like, look beyond the titles, and I'll share some of the roles that are there in both design as well as product management in the email as well. So with that, Adrian, any parting comments?
I just 100% agree. And yeah, really finding that right fit for you and expanding beyond what the title of the role looks like is really important. Like, I think that's one skill that I do really well, is visualizing how to get what I want out of what I need. And I would say that to you too. Is I looked at this role and other roles I was interviewing for, and basically I cared more about what the objectives of the role was over the title, because I wanted the experience. And so when I was recruited for this role, and was meeting with the recruiter, I was like, I want to be in a product role. And so when I interviewed, I was like, I know this doesn't have a product label or definition, but this is how I intend to approach the role. And our organization is a user experience based organization. And so it was a good fit. And I brought in all of those other skills. So like, just because it doesn't have the title doesn't mean it doesn't have the vision or the structure of what it is you're trying to do that you can then utilize to transition into another product role, like mid or senior level. So yeah. And if anyone like has any additional questions, you can always message me on LinkedIn. You can, I'm pretty sure my name is the only name out there that's Adrienne Mach, so you can find me pretty easily, but happy to continue to answer questions about this on social.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Adrienne. This was lovely, and it's an honor moderating and hosting you in a PM Dojo event. It's kind of, yeah, it
It's
feels
so great.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Adrienne. This was a blast. I'll send all of the materials in an email, and for anyone who wants to kind of keep abreast with all of our community events that are completely free, make sure that you subscribe on our website so that you get to hear of all of our forthcoming events. We're planning some really amazing events. And thank you, Bernice, and our events team for hosting this. This was lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, Bosky.
See ya. Bye bye.